We are now about to begin the front. First, take a look at the pattern instructions and cast on the appropriate number of stitches for your size. And you're going to use the same cast on that you did for the back. So in my case, I have cast on 79 stitches using the thumb method. We're only going to have one selvage stitch, which will be right here on this side, because the last 8 stitches are going to be our button band. Our button band is knitted on, so no sewing, right? And this is true for all 8 sizes. So to start the first row, knit the first stitch. Now we're going to work in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. First stitch is your selvage stitch, so we're going to knit 1 and purl 1 to the last 8 stitches on this needle. So you can see I've worked all the way across. I now have 8 stitches left on my needle. 2, 4, 6, 8. Now it may be very helpful to use a stitch marker because we're about to begin the button band. And I do recommend using, like in this case, a stitch marker, at least for the first few rows. It may be a little bit more difficult to tell where the button band is. So for these last 8 stitches, we are going to simply knit across. For these 8 stitches here on the button band, they are going to be worked in garter stitch. So you will always knit these 8 stitches. Go ahead and work your ribbing and your selvage stitch just like we did before. On the return, you're going to knit. On coming back the other direction, you're going to slip that stitch. When we get to row 8, then we're going to work a buttonhole if you wish for your cardigan to have buttons. If you do not wish for your cardigan to have buttons, simply omit the buttonhole, and then we're going to continue working till the front body matches the length of the back body. If you're following the pattern exactly, the pattern instructions exactly, this will be approximately 144 rows in total, starting at the hem and ending at the beginning of the arm side. I'm going to include buttonholes in this, so we're going to come back when we get to row 8, and I'll give you the instructions for the buttonholes from there. I have now gotten to the start of row 8, which is where our first buttonhole will be if you're adding in buttons. So far your piece should look something like this. You have 8 stitches of garter stitch, and then your remainder is going to be a knit 1, purl 1 ribbing, and the final stitch will be your slipped selvage stitch. Buttonholes will exist only in the 8 stitches of the button band. The buttonhole pattern here is symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which end you're coming from, it will always be the same. So to make a buttonhole, you are going to knit 2, 1, 2, and then you are going to cast off 4. Knit the last one, slip your stitch marker, and you're going to continue all the way to the end of the row. On the next row, so far your work should end up looking a bit like this. We have our ribbing up to our stitch marker, 2 stitches, 4 cast off, 2 stitches. So we have like a little hole right there. In fact, that's what we want because we are wanting a buttonhole. So for row 2 of the buttonhole, we're going to work across up to our stitch marker. And we're just going to do this just like we have before. Once we get up to the stitch marker on row 9, we're going to slip the stitch marker, knit the first 2. Now we're going to cast on 4. Again, I find the thumb method the most useful for this because we still want these to have a little bit of elasticity in them to go around a button. But we're also going to come through and we're going to finish off this edge So don't worry if it looks a little weird right now, because like I said, we're going to come back through at the very end and finish off all of these buttonholes. So cast on 4. So we've knit 2, cast on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Knit the last 2. And right there is a very simple buttonhole. You can see it a little bit better. So like I said, we're going to come through and whip stitch around these edges just to help strengthen them and kind of neaten them up a little bit. So if this upper edge looks a little weird, don't worry too much about it right now, because we do have some finishing techniques. To finish off the ribbing, you're going to continue working until you have 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters of ribbing, which is roughly 28 rows, or use whatever row count you had for the back. So if you worked 30 rows of ribbing for the back, you're going to work 30 rows of ribbing for the front. For your button band, you are going to continue working in garter stitch, and you will add buttonholes in on every 17 rows, row 17 and 18. If you are shortening or lengthening this, move the buttonholes around as you need to. I recommend if you're going to lengthen or shorten, do it in 2-inch increments, because then you're just omitting or adding another buttonhole, and it just makes the math a whole lot easier. If you follow the pattern that instructions as written, you'll end up with 9 buttonholes, but again, you can decrease that amount if you'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and finish working the ribbing, and then I'll come back when we're done with that. Once you have finished all the ribbing, we're going to go ahead and start the moss ribbing pattern. So at this point, this is kind of what your piece should look like so far, assuming that you do in fact have you are including the buttonholes. So you have 3 inches of ribbing or 7.5 centimeters. I'm doing mine at 28 rows, and you should have 2 buttonholes if you're doing 28 rows. So now to start, just like we did before, slip the first stitch. This is your selvage stitch. Going to knit 2, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 2. These 7 stitches are the first repeat of the moss ribbing pattern, just like we did on the back. You're going to go ahead and repeat these 7 stitches all the way across. Also, regardless of your size, this repeat will fit in evenly. So if you have any extra stitches, or you have an incomplete repeat, you need to go back and recount your stitches and see where the issue is. Just keep in mind that you're going to have this first one here is a selvage stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and work across the rest of the front. When you get to the end of the row, slip your stitch marker, knit the last 8 stitches, because again, we are going to continue the button band all the way up the front. Row 2 of the moss ribbing pattern, we are going to knit the first 8 for the button band, slip the stitch marker, purl, and now we're going to start the second row of the moss ribbing pattern. So purl 3, 1, 2, 3, knit 1, purl 3, 1, 2, 3. These 7 stitches are the repeat, the second row repeat of the moss ribbing pattern. You're going to go ahead and repeat these 7 stitches all the way across to the last stitch, knit the last stitch. These 7 stitches will fit in evenly, so if for some reason you have any extra, you need to go back and recount and see where the issue is. I'm going to go ahead and finish off this row, and I'll come back when we're done. So when you finish the second row of the moss ribbing pattern, your piece should look something like this, where you have your ribbing and your moss ribbing pattern up here and your garter stitch button band over to the side. One thing I do want to point out, this garter stitch is going to want to pull together, so if this edge wants to basically look a little bit shorter, that garter stitch is doing what it's supposed to do. And your ribbing is going to want to pull in quite a bit. So if this part seems wider than down here, that's just stitch mechanics and they're doing what they're supposed to do. All right, so you are going to continue in the moss ribbing pattern, repeating the two rows that we just did up until your side seams are 16 inches or approximately 144 rows, remembering to add in your button bands. Once you have knit all of the rows for the body, so in my case this is 144 rows, we are going to start with the cast-offs for the arm side. If you look at the instructions in the pattern, it will tell you how many to cast off. This will be the same number as the back. In my case, this is going to be 7 stitches. So on this next right side row, and right side simply means the side facing out, does not mean correct or incorrect. It is the side facing the outside is considered the right side, and the wrong side is the side facing the inside. That's where I had to join some more yarn. So on the next right side row, I'm going to go ahead and cast off 7 and work to the end of the row. You'll notice that on this row is the one where I will be completing this buttonhole. All right, let me go ahead and cast off and then work to the end of the row, and we'll come back after that. So I have cast off, worked all the way across, finished off the buttonhole, and then worked 1 row without shaping. So I'm back on a right side row. At this point, we're going to start the decreases, and we're going to be decreasing from both sides. We're going to be decreasing from the armhole side, and we're going to be doing just like we did on the back. You will be decreasing 1 stitch inside your selvage stitch. So this first one becomes your new selvage stitch, and you will be decreasing inside of that, make it invisible just like you did for the back. And again, look at your pattern instructions and they will tell you how many times to decrease. In my case, I will be decreasing 1 stitch every row for 14 rows on the armhole side. On the button band side, I'm also going to be decreasing. However, I will be decreasing at a different rate. I will be decreasing on this and every alternate row until at the end I have 31 stitches remaining. When you have finished all of the decreases for the upper chest, you should have a piece that looks approximately like this. To shape for the shoulders, we're just going to cast off 23 stitches, which will be all of the moss stitch ribbing, and we will leave the 8 stitches for the button band intact. Let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and I will show you how to attach the collar for the back neck, because that is in fact knitted on. So once you're done, your piece should look something like this, with your button band still being on your needle, and all of these 23 stitches have been cast off. So now let's go ahead and take a look at how we're going to join this. This is just the back of the garment, and I'm going to lay it so that the shoulder seams from the back garment meet up. Conveniently, you will notice that the ribbing pattern from the front and the back will match up. So what we're going to do is we are going to knit this button band onto this back about halfway through. Okay. Just so you can kind of see how I have my needles arranged. I took the back off of my stitch holder and threaded on. I have a very long circular needle, and I've put the back onto here. Then I'm going to knit across these 8 stitches of the button band. Just kind of line them up. And then when I get to the last stitch, I'm going to knit it together with a stitch from the back. And so you're just going to continue doing that, knitting 2 together, and then working along till you're about halfway through the back neck. So in my case, it's about right about here. Okay. The reason for this is that we're going to seam up the back neck, and that's going to make it much more invisible rather than running the potential of having anything be slightly off at like your shoulder. Most people are not going to be investigating the back of your collar to see how your stitching is. And if someone is investigating the back of your collar without your express consent, we need to talk about personal space. So yeah, just keep going. Either at the beginning or the end of the row, you're just going to knit these 2 together. And then work across. And I find that it is easiest to stop wherever I stop knitting. I'm going to stop on a row with my yarn at the top. That's going to make seaming and hiding and weaving in my yarn much easier. Here I have worked the opposite front up to the arm side, and which I will be getting ready to start on the next row. But what I wanted to show you was when the instructions say, reversing shaping to match, this is what they mean is that, you can see here that the button band is on the other side. Obviously, I have omitted the buttonholes on this side because you need to be able to attach the buttons themselves. But from here, I would go ahead and do my cast-offs and then my decreases on both edges and then work your way up. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that these edges, you may be 1 row off, but it will actually match the back. Let me show you what I mean. Here is the back with the front on here. And here is my opposite front laid down. You can see these 2 will overlap each other actually. I've got them laying side by side so you can see the opposites. But when it comes to the back, as you recall, you worked the arms up to the arm side, and then you cast off, worked across, cast off, and then went back and forth. And it's going to be the same thing up here. On one side, you would have immediately cast off on row 145. This one, you're going to go all the way across, cast off on row 146. And yeah, you're just reversing the shaping, but you'll probably be about 1 row off.